Thanks very much. It's great to be at TBEX again. This is my 6th time, I think, at TBEX. And I remember years ago when I first was going to come to TBEX, all I saw was all of the social media stuff. And I thought, oh, all the people here, you know, they're not experienced. They're not going to teach me anything. And that is so far from the truth. You know, you don't need to be an experienced blogger to be able to share things that are valuable. And I've gotten so much over the past 6 years coming to TBEX, and it's been great to see writers that have written for us, and new writers and old writers and experienced people. But anyway, I want to introduce myself. There's 3 seats up here if you want to take one up in the front. Don't worry, you don't have to speak. My name is Max Hartshorne. I'm the editor of GoNOMAD Travel. I started publishing GoNOMAD in 2002. I think I might have the record for the oldest blog in this whole organization. I don't know anybody else who started before we did. But it's been great to learn over the course of all these years. And I love talking about travel writing, and I'm so happy that you're all here. I appreciate that. So as Michaela said yesterday, you know, you've taken the first step. You've come to TBEX, and that signifies that you're ready to become a travel writer. And I apologize if some of these tips are, kind of for beginners. I think that everybody's got something to learn, and I have things to learn from you. So forgive me if you already know this, because that very well may be true. But this is the question that I always ask people when they run up to me very enthusiastically and say, "Oh, I want to write for you. I want to write for you." And I always ask them, "Well, where have you been?" It's really, for me, you know, GoNOMAD.com, if you've seen this site, it's really a zag versus a zig site. It's not a traditional site. It's not we don't really care about what's happening in Orlando, and we don't care about what's happening in the Bahamas or the casinos. You know, we're really interested in Kampot, Cambodia, or Samarkand, Turkmenistan, or maybe something that you found fantastic, you'll see a little bit later, in Annapolis, Maryland. There's so many great places that aren't as discovered, but the ones that are discovered already aren't nearly as interesting to us as the ones that are not. And here's a great example. Just read through this. You can see this really, really compelled me. This is a story on roads and kingdoms, which I'd really recommend you check out. It's Anthony Bourdain is one of the curators for this new website, Roads and Kingdoms. But they do long form, and I just love long form. I love writing. I love digging in. And you read this, and how many times have you ever seen an article that isn't about, you know, women driving in Saudi Arabia? This is about the date festival in Saudi Arabia. Again, it's just a fantastic idea for a story, and it immediately got my attention because I don't know anything about it. The photos were brilliant, and this site is just the kind of place where this type of thing would really catch my eye, you know, if somebody submitted a story like this to me. So you're out there and you're doing your thing. So what's the hook? You know, I was a newspaper writer for a couple of years, and it was always important to me to figure out what's the hook. You know, why am I here? Why do I care? Where am I? So it's really important to tell us where you are. I laugh about sometimes some of the articles come in and they don't say where it is. And it takes me 3 paragraphs because they're comparing it to a place that it isn't. And, you know, the lead needs to say where it is. So it's obvious where it is. It's Annapolis. And they give this writer, Bruce Northam, who's one of my good friends and a really excellent writer, really sets the scene. You can just feel this. I love the way he uses the parentheses. I'm not a big parentheses person, but I love the way he did this. Right away, I went to Annapolis because I read this story. You know, so I got to say, you know, where have you been? And tell me where I'm going to be when I go along on your journey with you for your story. Okay, so the same thing. You know, getting right to it. Because so many times, I always say the best lead is like 3 paragraphs down, because you tap danced for the first 2 paragraphs about what it is that you think and what you used to do and what your father used to say, and blah, 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 blah. You need to get right at it so that it's clear, you know, where are we going? Why should I care? What's the hook? And what's new there? You know, what's relevant there? What's new? You're still a reporter. You're a writer, you're a travel writer, you're a blogger, and all those other things that everybody talks about, but first and foremost, you need to take me there and make me want to stay there. Here's a good example. Just again, sorry for the long text, but I think it really gives you really puts you in Burlington, Vermont. This is a young guy, and he's excited about it. One of his first assignments for us, and just the way he writes it, the way he pulls you in, you're right there with him, and you want to know what's going on. And this obviously is paired with good photos, really excellent photos of the guy on the guitar, and the scene outside in Burlington, Vermont, which is a beautiful little town in New England, really exciting place. Again, people might say, I originally started talking about, Samarkand, Turkmenistan, and stuff like that, but, Burlington, Vermont can be just as exciting as Annapolis, Maryland, as Tucson, as your town. There are things in your town which I don't know, and don't short sight yourself by not citing that your own town might be as interesting as these more exotic places. But I like the way he did this story. Really worked for me. Now, this is the hardest part, I think, of any article, is that arc. I always say, you could do it two ways. You could do giant pictures with little captions, and then the whole article would be a bunch of pictures that take up the whole width, which is not what I want to do, and I'll never do that. I would prefer to have a 500 pixel wide picture and a lot of good text in between. But you do have to think about a beginning, a middle, and an end. Why I went there, what it was like, what it felt like, what it tasted like, what it smelled like, and then what happened to me. Did anything change in either my perception of that place, or has that place changed? Did you go back to the place and say, like I just recently was in Portugal last week. I was in Portugal, and I've been there in 2014. And in 2017, Portugal is a whole different place because people are enthusiastic and positive, and the economy isn't strangling them anymore. And so it was really noticeable, and I commented on that that's a relevant thing. If I went there in 14, or in 17, see some differences, that's going to affect everybody. And again, to remember this, and I'll say this later, but it's about their trip, not your trip. So don't make it all about your trip. Make it about your trip as they can experience, as the readers can experience it. Think about it. Arthur Farmer always said that. He said, make it about what they can do. You can do this, you can do that. Don't, turn it into your own personal glorification. If you go on a press trip and they take you just on a helicopter tour that nobody could afford, that's great. But probably the only people that can afford to do that are the richest of the rich. So maybe that's not as relevant. It just makes people feel guilty, feel jealous. Your massage isn't that interesting to me. That's why I don't really like spa writing, because your massage didn't affect me at all. And it really does, so I would really pull away from the too much personal. And yeah, again, thinking about all of the things that use better words, use better senses. Here's a good example of that. I really enjoyed this story, and you could smell these truffles, you can see where she is, you can hear the dogs that are there, they're digging up the truffles, and I love this part. She captures it really well, and again, I love it when a writer puts something like this in there. I just love that. There's a way you can be you, and you can be you can really make it personal. But you can also, at the end of this story, she's talking about a lot of details about how to get there, how much it costs to look at the truffles. There's a whole bunch of different things that she's doing there. But the main thing is she's smelling, she's tasting, she's feeling it. And this is good writing, and this is what you want to do. As Gary Arndt said at the beginning, writing matters, and quality matters, and photos matter, and taking your time. And my photographer that works with me, Paul Schul, I sat with him after he shot a bunch of pictures, and he spent more time on Photoshop than he did shooting. And I said, wow, and the pictures look so fantastic because he takes the time to really work on them. He doesn't do 1,000 pictures. He does, 50 pictures and then 15 hours in Photoshop, and they become beautiful images. I always say this to writers about dialogue, other voices. So you're going somewhere, let's say I went to Portugal, I went to the Algarve. Great, so I've been there once. my voice is not nearly as valuable as that guy that we met who cooked the sardines and we asked him about it, or an expat who moved there who might have some things to say about it, or another gentleman. I took a food tour in Portugal, and this guy was with us. He lived in another city in Algarve. So, his voices in my story are far, far better and more relevant than mine. I mean, admit it, we're bloggers. We went there for a week on a fam or whatever, and that's great. I'm glad you went. But dig a little deeper and get that other voice so that the voices are local voices, and you quote them exactly how they spoke. And use your phone. I mean, we have these amazing tape recorders on our phone. Use your phone, write down what it is that they said. This is another quote from John McPhee. Who here heard of John McPhee? Anybody heard of John McPhee? He's one of the New Yorker's oldest writers. He's written for 50 years for the New Yorker. He's written about 40 or 50 really, really good nonfiction books. And this guy's a fanatic about getting it right and writing it down. And this is a quote from a gentleman named Peter Heller. And you're going to find out about Peter Heller. He's got a movie coming out made from one of his books. He's a brilliant novelist and writer and nonfiction writer, travel writer, and also a fiction writer now. But he's talking about, he's done some things covering, in Antarctica, the sea shepherds, and he's a fanatic note taker. And Peter was the one who got me into this, which I really recommend this, okay? I recommend this and this, because the business cards and all the junk go in here, and they all stick in here, so all your notes are very complete. You got, your cards, you got matches, you got all the stuff that you really never could keep organized. These cost $1 at CVS, you buy 10 of them, and you put a little style on it, and then you got a whole shelf full of all your notes for the next, all your trips. But Peter taught me that. He was in a van with me, and he's writing so much. I said, geez, you got better notes than me. So you should have better notes than the other people on the trip. And your story should come out before the other people's story on the trip, because you have a blog, you have control. These guys on the trip, I'm going to submit this story, it's going to come out, in a year. You should get your stories up right away. You have the control over that. That's the beautiful thing about what we do. And send it out to everybody, because you have all their emails, because you kept their business cards in your hardback binder that you have. And so you can get back in touch with them later. And if you go back to the same place, you can pull out that notebook and grab that name of that place you stayed and maybe make connections with the tourism board, because you kept all the stuff in the book instead of those stupid business cards that are flying all over your desk, which I know everybody has those business cards that we get from trips. Now, this is not necessarily advice that everybody agrees with, because, the people that win the awards, as my friend Tim LaFell said, are the ones that write it in the first person. But the truth is, the trip's over, you did it already. So you can't say, I'm driving down the road, because you're already down the road. You've set the story in, the road was a long time ago. So I oftentimes change tenses for people, because I feel like it's just, it works a little bit, and I'd say you could do it a little bit, but just be careful about the tense, because you did that and it's done, and you're no longer on that road. So think about that. And again, one of the things I do is, as GoNOMAD, since we've been around for a long time and we have an office and stuff, we have interns that come in, and we have 2 interns every semester from UMass, and they start writing for us, and they write like term papers, like really stilted, weird words. Just write the way you talk. Really don't do, there's so many examples of this, but they do this tap dance, and I go through and I edit it, just make it sound like the way you talk. Like really read what you wrote. That's the best thing, read out loud what you wrote. And then you'll get a feeling for am I being conversational? Do I sound like I'm talking to a friend? I always say to people, your lead is that thing that you told me when you came back from the trip, and I only had 2 minutes to listen to you because I'm going to move on to something else. And I said, how's that trip? How was your trip to Nevada? And then you gave me this little story. That's the lead of your story. The thing that came to your mind first is the lead, because people give you about that much time. It's so sad. I want to tell you about my trip. And then you don't ever really tell them that much about your trip. You tell them that first part. And then, you move on. But I'd have to say the tense thing is, and the simple language, you can't make it better. Now, the other thing I always say about this is that I want a narrow focus story. When you do say you go on a trip, you're not going to write a guide to Provence. You went there, but how about if you talk about this experience where you met these people that, well, I'll give an example. Like, let's say they got a job in the vineyards and they were, working in the vineyards, seasonally working in the vineyards. That's a great story. Or narrow it down so that, let's say you went to Provence, but then you went to this little island off of the coast of Provence, like I did. Focus on the island. Focus on the narrow, small piece. You can always write, more than one story. But I think it's really important, if people send me a query and it says, I'm going to Barcelona, that's and everybody's been to Barcelona already. Barcelona, you'd have to really work hard to find a place that hasn't already been written about to death in Barcelona. And don't tell me about the pickpockets. I know about the pickpockets. Don't tell me about Gaudi. We know about Gaudi. But, one of our writers, Inca, she wrote a story about the Latin Quarter of Barcelona. She took a little piece of the neighborhood in Barcelona and wrote about that. Don't write about New York City, but write about Soho, or write about a group of restaurants in Soho, or think about the High Line, or like we just did a story about parks in New York City. And I queried all these people about what's your favorite little park in New York City. There's like 1,200 parks in New York City. It's amazing. And so, again, these are things that Central Park, Prospect Park, come on. Dig a little bit, narrow that focus. So don't try to, tell me everything. A Costa Rica guide, no. But a surfing village where you did yoga and you surfed and there was this really great expat community and you can do it and it's really inexpensive, now you're talking. You really need to slice it up. And again, you're really more than a writer, you're a reporter. You're somebody that is, you're not there to just gloss over the details. You want to dig in a little bit. One of the things I always do on my trips is I take about 10 to 12 trips a year. And I've been doing this for 20 years. And over the years, I used to use taxis, now I use Ubers. But you ask the Uber driver, you say, what are people talking about in this town? What are the things that people are talking about? If I picked up the newspaper today, what would be the topic that people were talking about? Is there a water problem? I remember I was in California. All they were talking about a couple of years ago was the water. It was interesting how it affected so many things. In Portugal, the conversation is about how much better it is than it used to, even though the minimum wage is still 500 euros, which is insane. But it's better there, and there's an optimism, there's a positive. So that's the vibe. I haven't really got a chance to ask anybody here, but I'd love to ask, if you lived in Ireland, or what are people talking about, or what's the buzz? Pick up the local paper. I love local papers. I always go and I always pick up the little paper. And I sit down and read the paper. When I was in Las Vegas, I went on a trip to Las Vegas. And again, I wouldn't have taken the trip, but it was downtown Las Vegas. It wasn't the Strip. So downtown to me was a little more interesting because the Strip is the Strip, and again, everybody covers that. But we went to some neat places, small casinos. And, I wanted to know what was the buzz, like what were people talking about? So I picked up this little paper, actually a pretty big paper, and I found this music festival that the people who were hosting the tour didn't even tell me about. It was this great music festival in downtown Vegas. You could buy a ticket, you go to like 30 venues that you could walk to. I went to some great music and got some great photos because I read that little local newspaper. And again, my guides didn't even know about the music festival, but I took the time to read that paper. And again, being a reporter, you think of yourself, you're a reporter, you're writing stuff down, you're really asking questions. Don't be in the background, like just taking pictures and Instagramming, get in there and ask some questions. This is a quote from one of my friends who passed away, but he was a great editor for AP. And this is really what he felt. I sent him an email, saying, tell me about writing, tell me about what you think. And for those that can't see, I will, yes. Strive to tell the new. Surprise the reader. There was no more desperate feeling than returning from a travel assignment and realizing you hadn't made enough entries in your notebook. You hadn't asked the right questions. You weren't curious enough. No amount of dazzling writing can overcome weak content. That's the hard part, gathering the material. Work on that. The writing will follow. And that's so true. And one of the things that, in terms of like adding to your story and adding facts and substance to your story, I mean, you open up Wikipedia as you're writing your story, and you pull facts out that are interesting facts, and you get them confirmed by the people that you wrote. You add the facts. You don't make it about what you think about the place. That's not that interesting. But what people are talking about there is interesting. And you can weave that into a travel story. You can say, like, people are in Cape Cod, people are talking about these shark attacks, because now, where I live in Massachusetts, there's a big shark problem because the seals are coming in. So that affects travel, because you don't want to go to the beach where there's sharks and they're all talking about it. If there was 1 or 2 shark attacks, that's going to be on the Cape Cod Times forever, because that's what they're talking about. So you can't go to the Cape and not at least think about mentioning this. These are the things that are on people's minds. And I think it's really important to do that, to be the writer, and be the reporter. Okay. And another comment that Steve made, I'm going to read a little bit of this. He said, don't hesitate to get a second opinion. Find the most brutal reader you know. Ask him or her to read it. Listen to the criticism. Seek concrete reasons why things work and why things don't work. Most people have no reason to be critical for the sake of being critical. Don't be afraid to heed the counsel of readers whose opinions you value. I think just reading it yourself out loud is really valuable too. A single error in a 2,000-word story can ruin the experience for any reader. Haven't we all come across an error in a news story or work of nonfiction that stops us in our tracks, makes us question anything that this writer is putting on paper? For broad overviews of the subject, Wikipedia is a really good place to start, and I do feel that same way too. I love adding the facts in there as well, but that one dumb mistake that you didn't check will kind of throw everybody off and make everything else suspect. I like this, to always do this, and I'm going to give you 3 examples of this, which I really like. In fact, I heard one from a gentleman who's here in the audience. He was sitting at lunch with us when I heard it. So, okay, we were talking about Stockholm. I was sitting with a bunch of people from tourism in Stockholm. And they talked about ways to write stories that take a different perspective and an unfamiliar way. One of them was, the guy goes to Stockholm and he falls in love with the voice of the subway. He travels all around Stockholm and just hears that voice in the subway. And it's a love story about trying to find who she is and how he can meet her. The other story I really loved was a story about Sicily by Kathy Arquilla. And Kathy wrote a story about 2 Kathys. She had the good Kathy, the Kathy that was on the press trip, and the other Kathy, who was really, really enamored with the guide, and who ended up falling in love with the guide and staying in Sicily. And she did this whole thing where she was going back and forth between the 2. Good Kathy would enjoy seeing this museum. Bad Kathy would try to figure out how to go to the guy's apartment. She went back and forth between the 2 characters, and it was a wonderful way to describe Sicily. And again, Sicily, really well covered on GoNOMAD. Totally used it because it was cool. The other one was a young writer that writes for us, who actually was on TV for a while. She was on America's Most Famous Model. And she did a story about Lviv, Ukraine. I know many of you haven't been to Lviv. I missed the chance to go to Lviv also. But she wrote this story, and it was a personal ad for Lviv. And it said the hardest thing about getting to know Lviv is that everybody's afraid of her Russian boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend. And it makes it very difficult to get to know Lviv, but if you know her, you'd love her. And she does the whole story is written as a personal ad. All of the attributes of Lviv as a woman, a personification as a woman. It's a really neat story. Again, this is a young woman in her 30s, went on this press trip, and instead of churning out all the same crap that she could churn out about a press trip, going through the itinerary, writing it, she did this other way of doing it. She put all the stuff in, but it was really great the way she turned it into something more, which was an advertisement that we're also familiar with, an OkCupid or Match.com profile. We talked about this, and I think this little tip, I use my camera a lot for notes. Again, you just can't have too many notes. you're going to be jealous of me after this trip. I'm going to write a story about Ireland. I'm going to have so much to say because it's going to be in here. But I think those little plaques, those things that you go to, just take a picture. Johnny Jett does this all the time. He always takes pictures of things. And I think it's very useful. And I also, oftentimes if a tour guide is good and he's got some good things to say, I'll pull out the recorder and just record the guy. Don't record the whole thing, but just record enough so you can add some of that guide stuff. These guides in Europe, these blue badge guides are so expert. They know so much, and their ability to add information is so valuable. And those people, you don't necessarily, maybe you're walking with them, you don't want to write it down as you're walking. So, you might want to do that where you take the picture. And again, we mentioned before about irony and having fun. Have fun with this. I think that being unusual, we're going to talk a little bit later about editors and about how to pitch editors, and I think this is really key. At the last TBEX, I don't know who here, does anybody here at the panel we did at the last TBEX about editors? I was on a panel with Tim LaFell was the moderator, and it was myself and Lonely Planet, an editor from Lonely Planet, and an editor from Coastal Living magazine. And we talked a lot about how to pitch editors, how to get their attention, what not to do. One of the things that Tracy said, which I don't know if people really want to hear this, but I thought it was pretty smart. She said, the editor's never really wrong. Don't argue with the editor. Don't try to win the argument because they won't answer your email ever again. So I don't think that's really true, but it was a good point. And she's getting 500 emails. So if you're the one who's arguing with her about the merit of your story, you're a pain in the ass. You're probably not going to move that far ahead. But I think that this part about surprising readers is also true with editors. The best queries are the ones that really wow, cool. I'm going skiing in Dubai. Oh really? Or I'm gonna write a story about all the places you can ski where there's no snow. They have these new ski areas. They're building one in the Alps actually. It's fake snow, and they have one in Wales. And they have a couple in Dubai, and I think there's a couple in there's one in New Jersey. So I like the irony of saying I'm going to go skiing and there's no snow, or I'm going to go to a winery in Mexico. There's quite a big wine growing area in Ensenada, Mexico. Again, it's just a little bit ironic and fun, and if your query includes that, you're going to get some attention because right away you're like, oh wow, oh okay, yeah, sure. And again, we talked a little bit about narratives. I think those three examples I gave you are great examples of narratives where you're just, you're narrowing that focus, you're keeping it from being too long, you're not making it so it's, something that is like a term paper. You're talking about a conversation with a friend. You sat down and you went to the coffee shop with your best friend and then tell me all about your trip. So think about what you would say. You'd probably set that up in a good way. You'd have some stories. That time we went here. So really, talk to me and write to me like I'm a friend who really wants to know. I might want to go there. I was thinking about going to Bulgaria. You went to Sofia, Bulgaria. Wow, what was that like? The thing about what was that like is, I say that all the time, but to me, your job is to explain what's it like there. Now, what does it feel like to be there? What does it do to you? Does it change you? Did it? One of the stories I really liked that we published, it's coming up. It's about Sapa, Vietnam, and the writer goes to Sapa, Vietnam. Have you ever been to Sapa, Vietnam? It's a remote part of Vietnam. You know that it's a place where tourists go, and you go there, and the bus drives up, and everybody from the town, the women in the town wear these red hats, and they're all looking in the window of the bus, and they're looking to see who's coming out of the bus because they want to sell you things in a good way. I mean, that's how they make a living, right? So they latch on to people, and they get out of the bus, and each one kind of latches on to one of the tourists, and they're very friendly, and they bring them to where they're selling their handicrafts, and they're making different things like clothes and stuff. And at one point in the article, my writer, great writer, Donnie Sexton, she said, but I don't really need any of those things. I don't need another tchotchke. I don't need a bag like that. Another writer turned around and she says, it's not about what you need. It's about them. And you're damn right you're going to buy something because they need you to buy something. You don't say, we have everything. What do we need? We don't need anything. But something that's made by a person that's going to cost you $10 and they're in Vietnam and it's going to be a souvenir of Vietnam and their whole livelihood is made up of selling these things, you're damn right you're going to buy something. And you're going to be happy about it because it's nothing. It's not going to cost anything. So it's not what you need. It's not what you need to do. It's what you can do. Is what she says. And again, that's a good example of like that story arc. She goes there. She's not sure what to find there, and then something clicks in her mind about wow, these people are living in a very, very cold part of Vietnam. It's challenging. It's cold, really poor, and I can do something for them in that small way. So there's a little emotion there, and I think emotion is really valuable. And there's not enough emotion in the top blogs. I mean, honestly, yesterday's, that we had some interesting talks about traffic and about getting the number of people that you want to have to get your blog. But I know the examples I looked at seemed like they were mostly giant pictures. And that's great, and I think pictures are great, and we really love pictures. But I think I really would rather be, have a narrative that gives me some emotion, gives me some feeling, along with the pictures. So I don't think that people don't read. I remember I was on a trip to Antigua in the Caribbean, and this guy was there, and he was an Instagram, and he was a Twitter. He loved Twitter, had all these followers on Twitter. And he said, nobody reads blogs, man. They just read Twitter. I said, bullshit, that's not true. They read a good story. They don't read yours. You haven't updated your blog in a year. No wonder they don't read yours. Shame for you, but the rest of us,